Today I'm the CeLTA rep, and I like to ask a couple of questions when we get started. So who currently teaches a language? All right, is that language English? Is that language something else? All right, who is currently a grad student? Who is currently faculty? Who's faculty in something other than Ling Lang? Faculty and staff in something other than, we have our subject area librarian, who's one of my favorite people. This is Stephanie Parenthesis from the library. So if you ever need library resources, that's where you start. Her guides and her. Let's see, who's been to these presentations before? All right, who's met Felix before?
Through email.
Through email, okay. Who's presented before at one of these? Okay, great. Who would like to present in the future? Okay. So today we have the pleasure of getting a presentation from the new director of CeLTA. So if you don't know everything that CeLTA does, it's a very wide range of services that CeLTA does and that it offers to the language teaching community here, as well as to the East Lansing community and beyond. Lots of research going on, lots of things that feed more and better language teaching at MSU and in this area. So Felix has come to us this year. He is going to present today on gamification, gamifying the language curriculum. And in case you did not know, Felix is also the president of the International Association for Language Learning Technology and a recognized expert in language resource centers, the physical space of them and the kinds of services that they can offer. And so he's speaking from experience and scholarship today, and hope you'll enjoy that. And remember to fill out a form at the end.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about gamification today. It's one of these buzzwords that from the last years has received a lot of interest, and some of this is a lot of hot air, like a lot of these technology terms that we see come in and out. Often there's a lot of hype and then they just kind of go away. So gamification is one of these. And I really thought about if I should call it something else, because it seems like, oh, it's one of those new things that'll go away. So I'll actually talk to you about a project, Mantilla Project, that used gamification very successfully and kind of hopefully can steer you a little away. I'll talk what gamification is about that in a little bit, but I do want to start with a story. This is where I was before I came here, Rhodes College, a small liberal arts college, where I worked in the German program. And the way this came about is we had some difficult conversations in the faculty, and these are very common in language departments these days. We talked about the fourth hour. Do you know what the fourth hour, when you talk about the fourth hour, is there's an extra hour that all language faculty taught at our institution and nobody else. And so a lot of us people on the tenure track said, wait a minute, we teach 5 courses here. That means theoretically there can be 5 extra hours. With preparation before and after, that takes up a lot of time, and research expectations are going up. That's not fair. A lot of tenured faculty said, well, we've done this all along. We need to do it because you learn more. That's true, but that's also true if you think about learning math or history or business. If you have an extra hour of instruction, you learn more. So there was a little bit of hubris in there as well. And we had some really difficult discussions about this. And people were really grappling with this. We also talked about some other things that we're doing, was something we called the 5th hour, which was a language table we had to go to that the students didn't like going to and the faculty didn't like going to, and it was a lot of work, right? So we had all of these extracurricular activities. We had a dreaded so-called culture portfolio, a culture portfolio, where students had to do X number of things outside of the classroom. That was kind of dreaded to grade by the faculty, but also by the students, because it was just this list of things you had to do X number of this, do X number of that. So we started experimenting with this 4th hour and 5th hour, and the compromise in the department I think was a good one. We said each language section decides what they want to do, and we're all pretty open to new things. So we thought about some sort of team teaching hybrid model for German, where we team taught 2 sections together and moved some of that online and some face-to-face, and we experimented with different things. Okay. So what we did was we founded a virtual city. Okay, we founded with our students and with my colleague Elizabeth Bridges the city of Pfefferhausen, And I will talk about how the city was born, how it grew, and how we developed an infrastructure. And I will do this very quickly. This led to our gamification efforts. We didn't start with saying this 4th hour is gamification. We started with an alternate reality project, okay? So what do we do? Very briefly. So we put the students into a room and told them, we are building a virtual city. You are all inhabitants in the city. What's the city's name? Where's the location? We had some conversations. We did some activities. The students came up with a name, with a structure about this. And so each of the students became a citizen and started building a business in this. And this was just during the 1st semester. They each had certain guidelines. So they founded businesses, they created an online portfolio, and they could do whatever they wanted to. We let them go and see, what if we let the students do what they want to do? And this is very much behind gamification. What are students going to choose if we let them choose? Usually we don't let them choose, right? All right. So here are just a couple of things. A lot of them founded businesses. These all look very great. So they did some research. They created professional sites. They're all linked in the city, and I'll give you the link to that. You can go to the city website. They blogged about it. They had certain tasks about, opening their business. We had business mixers that were face-to-face. We had Shark Tank activities, elevator pitches, all of those kinds of things that you may know from reality TV in the business world. We also used a really shifting array of social media tools. So not everything you might see on the city website is visible. So we use tools like having an answering machine and some voice tools, online discussion tools like Flipgrid. We each had a Twitter handle, and they each represented themselves through this, okay? So this was kind of a fun way for us to kind of tie some of these new technologies together. But this really grew. We looked at did some action research and looked at some of the literature. None of this was all that new. Role-playing is a staple in a lot of lower-level language teaching classes. Le Meuble, if you know this comes out of French pedagogy, I think from the 70s, where you have a porter in the house, and the students are inhabitants, and they go to the porter, and the porter gives them tasks to do, sends them out in the city. So this is decades old. Something called global simulations. A lot of schools, teachers, programs do this. And more recently, also alternate reality games that utilize technology and kind of use augmented reality. We called it an imagined community simulation, an IMSIM, and we started closely looking at what we are teaching in our curriculum, which was very old traditional curriculum. What are the aspects that we're doing in the book, and how can we make it more interesting for the students? So we started looking, and this should all look pretty familiar, right? So we started looking at some of these very traditional ways. How can we have the students deal with this? So instead of just doing the generic classroom, they had to create their own spaces online and describe them. In terms of calendars, they had to have practical things like do their open house event at their business, for example, and then you had to use it in context always. They could come up with their own family, so that it wasn't the quite heteronormative family, a very traditional kind of family setup, but they could really experiment with their identities, and I'll come to that in a second. And they could tell stories, right? Rather than the stories that these silly little comics suggest, they could come up with them and follow each other. And that was really fascinating to turn that over. And we expanded it from the 3rd semester German where we started, and we expanded this into all the other classes until we had it throughout the whole curriculum. So what then happened is that all of us, we were 3 faculty teaching, that we started with 101, literally asking the students to be born. So with 101, they came into the world, into the city of Pfefferhausen, they became a citizen, and they would grow up. They would start learning their numbers, their colors, all of those kind of basic categories. They would then go to university and found, in German terms, that's called a WG, which is a student community that lived together. They had some adventures, they produced videos, all of these things that were tied together by this narrative. Students started writing for the city. So for example, when we founded the public library, that was done by students, right? So all of this was student driven. We even started ordering some swag and kind of taking this to conferences and things like that. I couldn't take that with me. That's all still at Rhodes. So. And then we started developing an infrastructure around this. We thought more closely about the identities that students have and the choices that students usually have. So one thing that was interesting, what students chose to be and do. And we were quite surprised. So they might switch their gender, they might switch their age, they switched their nationality. At first we thought, well, they're all German. No, somebody was an Italian immigrant in Germany. That was really interesting. An American embodying somebody from Italy in Germany founding a restaurant there. That was very interesting culturally, and for the students to represent this, we graded them basically on this as how believable this was. If somebody from the outside could follow their Twitter handle, would they know this was a fake person, right? We also started thinking more about kind of things like copyright, privacy rights. The good thing about this is the students are making this all up. Like, there are no privacy concerns really here. So this really allowed us to circumvent certain things and just say, well, this is all made up as long as you're playing by the rules and use legal things, etc. All right, which brings me to gamification. I'd like to read you one quote. I have very few quotes here, but I couldn't delete all of them. Wolf in 2011 writes, "Despite all the progress that has been made in foreign language teaching during the last 20 years, despite the introduction of communicative language teaching and its different models, the mainstream language classroom is still determined by a form of classroom discourse that English foreign language theoreticians describe, somewhat mockingly, as teacher-controlled interaction. A form of discourse which is planned and directed by the teacher and gives the students only the opportunity to react." Almost everything we do, and we do this with teacher training, I do this too, we come into the classroom and we ask the students to do X, Y, and Z. Right? That's how all classes work. That's the idea behind the class. Now but we know in terms of extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, we know it's much more advantageous if the students do it because they want to do it rather than me telling them to do it. So what if we took some of this control away and actually made it student-centered? What if, right? And that's what we did with the gamification. So what is gamification? Gamification I would describe as using gaming principles in non-gaming situations. Okay, and I'll give you some examples for this. This was not what we were doing. This is what this looked like in our alternate reality project when we started. We gave them different missions. Put in for mission, just put in task or quest or exercise, whatever you want to. It's basically like a workbook. Maybe the content was more fun, but what if the students chose, they think the idea of being an inhabitant of Pfefferhausen is utterly ridiculous. Who are we to tell them, and who are we to know that the students truly like this activity? Surely, many of them did. But I know there were some that just thought, I don't want to be this like fake city thing, like what's the point? I just want to do some grammar here. Or I want to write an essay. Well, where's all that, right? And who are we as professors to tell them, right? So in the end, we kind of mimicked the old school approach. So we changed this radically, and this was possible just because of a number of things. We were a small program, we were a private school, and the two of us had just gotten tenure, so we could do things that before would have been maybe frowned upon, okay? And it aligned with this 4th hour, giving us this time and the space of saying, you do what you want to do as long as students do work in this hour. How you deal with this, use it as an experiment. So those things align. So we went into gamification. We had thought about this for years. We've done this in many ways. Gamification isn't totally new. It's basically about incentives. And we know this all around us. In industry, we see this. If you're a runner, I'm a runner. You can have these apps that kind of, if you run on a rainy day, it'll tell you, great job, you ran today, and you get a badge for it, right? You can compare yourself to other runners, right? You can see what they do, and you get a kind of a playlist. Anyone who has an Apple Watch has seen this before, and probably other people too. This is gamification. You reach a goal. There's a certain goal to reach. That is very powerful because language education is the total opposite. You start from zero, and it takes you a very long time to reach very fuzzily defined goals such as communicative competence, intercultural competence, an understanding of otherness. All of these goals that we have are very hard, especially for learners, to reach, and they take years, and you never finish. I mean, we tell them, this is an ongoing process. I'm still a language learner, even in my own language. Well, there's no end to it. What should you reach? Games are the opposite. Games work in that they give you something that's very reachable. So there's some overlap with task-based language learning here, right? You have something that you actually accomplish, right? Something where you say, check mark, I've done this, I reached a certain level. And that's why these things are so powerful. If you almost have filled your ring here, you're going to be like, okay, I'm going to do this. And many people do. Even my dad, who's in his mid-70s, he got an Apple Watch and he tweets me, well, not doesn't tweet me, but emails me and says, I reached 10,000 steps today. Things like that. New record. And we see this all around us. Businesses really invest in this heavily. If you have ever tried to reach silver level or above in an airline program, that's gamification. You see all of these bars here. Utility companies use that, both in a way to measure yourself and see where you're standing, but also where you are relative to others. So you can see, oh, you're using way less than your neighbors. I'm good, right? All these other neighbors wasting energy, I'm saving energy. So comparing to others, there's a certain competitive element to games, right? And some students really respond well to it. The task-based kind of industries using this heavily, there are apps like Epic Win, where you play a game and you reach goals, you do your chores at home, you finish your emails, or you're vacuuming, or you're doing the dishes, you can get points and you level up. You can even do this with your kids and assign chores, right? And then the kids can compete and they get a virtual currency that they might be able to exchange to a real currency. So you get 500 virtual gold coins, that's a movie night, right? Or ice cream, or something like that. So there must be some value, usually behind gamification. Eventually you get some value, right? So with the airline miles, eventually you might get bumped up to first class, and that's awesome, right? So that's why people do it, the possibility of something tangible. Now in the education realm, we're seeing a proliferation of tools now. So whether it's Classcraft, which is kind of fantasy-based gamification engine, Class Dojo, which is more towards the K through 5 crowd, I would say, maybe K through 12. Our partner university here in Ann Arbor created a whole system called Gradecraft based on gamification principles, points, badges, leaderboards, PBL, that's the kind of general thing. And they created a system that's a course management system, like Moodle, D2L, Blackboard, etc. I don't like the system, I'm just showing you a number of systems that people are developing this. This is way too convoluted. It looks like a traditional system to me. So where do we go with this? We started out with Pfefferhausen and all of these different parts, but where we really ended up was looking at this gamification aspect and said, let's see how many students actually want to be in the city and what else could they do? And this started a really interesting conversation. All right, let me show you how this looks on our end. So we started having tons of quests for our students. We sat with our colleagues and came up with all of these tasks. Write a city, a choose your own adventure story within German, for the German program within the city. Get 200 points. Visit an art exhibit that had German artifacts, 50 points. Create your own beer coaster for your business in Pfefferhausen and scan it, 20 points. Okay? Well, actually, 20 points for creating it, 10 points for scanning it. 5 points to join the German email list. We stopped making students do stuff. All we did was put tasks in there and give them certain criteria and see what students actually chose. So you never had to sign up for the German email list. You can bet that 100% of the students signed up for it. We never had that rate before, right? This saved us as faculty a ton of time. So this was not just a system to make students learn better. Over time, our program got way leaner and the students liked it. So it was really a student-driven program. I'll just show you a couple of these other quests that we had. I don't want to go in there. Record your own German tongue twister. Go to the senior seminar. And we bumped the points up, and the dean came, and the whole German program was there. It's a way of behavior modification, and it's a kind of tricky it's a kind of tricky thing that not just the students are playing, but we're playing the students. This is called ergodic, and ergodicity is the term for this. And I'm quoting Wilson. The term interactive is an oversimplification of the dynamics of the user interface relation that situates the user in a utopian discourse of active agency and dialogue with technology. In contrast, ergodicity situates agency as a process in which the user follows the prompts of the program and the game plays the user just as the user plays the game. So in a way, the students were thinking they were playing a game, and we told them this is not a fun game like, you know, some sort of 3D shooter. This is kind of about agency. But what they didn't realize, or maybe they did realize, is that we were still controlling all aspects of this. We could change the points. We could say you only reach an A if you have 3 communicative activities, so you don't just go watch a bunch of movies. We could tweak the system so that we could have things happen how they were to happen. We started looking at game design and the principles. There's a whole industry. I mean, there's multi-million-dollar industry is how games are made and the psychology behind games. We started doing a quest map, and we kind of started looking at things, how we can stagger things, that if you do one thing, that opens up new things for the students. So if you were starting with you wanted to embark on the Pfefferhausen narrative, you started with getting your name, and then a website, and then page 1, and then you did this event and that, and you kind of were brought into it. It was very simple. You just clicked on one thing, and it told you what to do. It was very easy. It's like, choose your name, and you're like, ooh, I got 5 points just by the name, and you're kind of brought in. Good games do that nowadays, video games. But the other team parts were like this as well, right? So we would do things like, okay, we had this wonderful German video game that we always started with, how do we integrate this into the curriculum? Well, the idea was we don't integrate it at all. We let the students choose. So we rewarded them for playing the game for 15 minutes, and then if they didn't like it, they got 15 points or something else. But if they liked it, they could play on and get some more points, right? So this, and we on the back end could see who did this and when and how, okay? So here are some things that students did. One surprising effect of this was that all of the events that the German program did were all of a sudden done by the students. No more us thinking, oh, what movie this semester? Oh, let's do this movie. Or contacting the German club that once again, you know, the students weren't really responsive. And we're like, come on, German club, give us some movies you want to watch. No, we told the students, you make the flyer, you pick the movie, you do all the advertising, and you get X number of points, okay? And so we had all sorts of things that we had never dreamt of. Like a caroling practice session. Look how many students came there. I would have never thought of doing that. And here they were singing in the language center German carols. That's not something I would have ever chosen for my students to do, but that's what they like to do, including a fake fireplace back there. Board games, Jeopardy games, quiz nights, all sorts of things. The most popular ones were switch your phone to German at the beginning of the semester and pledge to never change it back. Most students did that. Now they could have done that before. Before we told them in our syllabus day, you know, you should practice outside, class is just one thing, but there was no reward for it. And somehow there's something really motivating of knowing someone is noticing, someone is acknowledging through these points. My professor otherwise might never know, but somehow now my professor knows and acknowledges that. There's something really powerful for that. So really we didn't do anything that we didn't expect our students to do before. We just kind of found a tracking mechanism and allowing them the choice. And if we found, oh my God, they're all doing that, maybe we're giving them too many points. Let's tweak it next semester. So we actually started a document in our German section where we had all of these quests, so that not one person comes up with them, but all of us could track it, and we tweaked over time. So when we said, okay, plan an event only during the first semester, how many points do we give? How many points for a movie? How many points for going to language table? And then maybe tweaking it and say, okay, the students aren't really coming to language table because it's really hard during your second semester to go to a language table and sit there for half an hour with near-native speakers and talk. That's really difficult. Let's bump up those points. Going to a movie with subtitles, well, that's super easy. Let's lower those points. But we never forbid any of it. In fact, we had a quest that said, make your own quest for other people. So they could suggest things and come up with ideas. So this kind of task list became bigger. And whenever I went to conferences, people asked me, can I get this task list? And I said, sure, but it's a work in progress. And at your institution, this would be different because we have different expectations of our students. this is program specific, you need to figure this out, but sure, go ahead, here's the Google Doc. But the conversations were really important, and this actually led to a whole change of the whole curriculum eventually, which was a 3-year process. We sat down and talked about the curriculum, which when I was an assistant professor sounded the most boring thing in the world. Later on I found the curriculum influences everything, and this really forced us to think about it. Why do we want our students to do it? There's so many automatic things in education and in language education that we've just done when I tell them, well, why do we sit there in a mixed group and have lunch together when it's really uncomfortable for almost everyone involved? Well, we've always done that. It's what you do as a language program. Why do we teach the 4th hour? We've always done that. So we kind of looked at all of these kind of holy cows and said, you know, are these really things we can't touch? Are these things that maybe we need to start talking about? And so that really for us was the key behind all of this. The gamification, yes, certainly it made our lives easier, and we found a way, either 20 or 25% of the grade, you know, you could level up and get an A. And that's kind of the practical stuff. So we had this leaderboard, and students got different levels. We gave them cute names and said, that equals a B, that equals an A. And by the end of the semester, not all students finished those tasks. That was really just kind of, it was just labor. I mean, you just had to do stuff. There was no testing involved. It was either you get the points or you don't, and we were able to reject it. Some students never did the work. Many of them did it during the end of the semester. We started scaling it so that the earlier you did stuff, the more points you got, to kind of incentivize students to start doing things during the first weeks, and not everyone doing it during the last. Because that was one of our problems. The language table, when it was required, we had empty tables, and in week 15, we had the whole program in the dining hall, and that was not the effect that we wanted to have. It was this thing, right?
Can I ask?
Yes.
Was that the entire grade of the course, or was
No, that was a partial, that was 20%, and before we really didn't replace anything. Before we had this culture portfolio and these activities and participation, we really just changed the name for it. So that was not a big structural program for us, and the idea was we had all of the other elements in place: quizzes, tests, essay, you name it, right? Oral exams at the end, finals, I mean, all of that was still in place. But there is value to some of those students who just do the work, and we know that sometimes in language education, if you're just engaged, you will pick it up eventually. If you're interested in it, we have that mission, it's called lifelong learning. If you can find something you're passionate about and you think about it, that's a value. That's our educational mission, right? And not all students got an A in that. That was the surprising thing. You'd think they all get 1,000 points. No, they didn't. And when they came and said, well, gee, I want to bump up my grade, I said, well, just look at the task list. There's nothing to tell you about it. I mean, it's glass clear, so no more questions about extra credit or all of that stuff. It was all right there through this engine. So just to kind of show you, and I'll talk about different technologies, and the technology, you know, they aren't quite perfect, but the way this worked is, so here was something, okay, so this was about a video game they did, so write what happens at the end. This was a way for us to kind of check on them that they actually played the game, and write how you liked the game, right? And so they submitted, and I, as an instructor, can return it and say that was insufficient, and I could write up what, etc. Has a WYSIWYG editor here. I could approve it, I could even give a reward, like a badge, and say that was extra good, like you did amazing, right? And I could give extra points if I wanted to. So the system allowed you to do that. And we did return stuff, but it wasn't like we graded it. It was just like either was sufficient or not, pass fail basically within the system. The system itself that we use, it's called Resli. We can look at that certainly. I showed you some screenshots. The systems obviously force you into certain behaviors, what the system allows, okay? None of these are perfect yet. There are other systems out there that you might want to experiment with. I would suggest thinking of this as a framework rather than a technology, and more as a framework of what might be possible in 5 or 10 years, okay? I'm seeing if the University of Michigan develops a system for this, then others will surely do. And we've seen more and more of these crop up. They're getting better, they're becoming mobile. This is not mobile yet, although you can play it in a mobile browser. It was a little clunky at times, but overall, the three of us, the instructors, we love the system. It's safe, we invested, but it paid dividends every year since then. And dividends in terms of us talking about this as having a shared platform of tackling all of these issues that we just kind of did because the senior member of the department told us, you junior people go to the language table, you sit there and talk to them, and then wondering why students didn't come. And so for us actually looking then back and seeing what do they actually do? What do they want to do? That started having conversations with students, and the students really appreciated that. Now I don't have data for you in terms of how much more effective language learners they became. I don't, and that's not my research. But if that might be, especially for the grad students here, there's a treasure trove of data you can get out of this. When do they do it? Do they do them all at once? What are the incentive structures here? How much do they get right or wrong? I mean, there's a lot you can do here. Maybe with a control group and measuring motivation. Again, I don't do that quantitative research, but you can get that at the back end. And some of these systems actually do this. So if you know ARIS, have you heard about ARIS? It's a game engine out of I think MIT and University of Wisconsin, and it's a kind of digital storytelling, augmented reality, game-based application that allows you to do things, like Pokemon Go kind of for education. Think about it that way, maybe. And they've done some really amazing projects, especially at the University of Oregon. So if you want to look at some of those projects, Julie Sykes, if you've heard her, she's the director of their Title VI National Language Center. They've done some studies there. They do have data on this, data sets. They produce these games for on-campus playing. Like, there are people out there, and it's really exciting to see what people do. And we can look at some of that if you wanted to, just very briefly. Let me see. I will come to this in a second. Just to give you an example, the Mantilla Project, and this is a little different. This is not related, but this is a kind of whodunit story in Spanish situated in New Mexico, where the students go out and get tasks on their phone and go out and have to do tasks in the real world. Solve problems, talk to people, record themselves, etc. Okay? Again, the technology is just iOS based, and so we were actually looking at something different now, and that's what we're going to play ourselves, you and I. We're going to play something now, and we're going to play something that is much simpler than the Resley, the 3D game lab that I showed you. That's much easier than ARIS as a platform. But that's also a bit more limited. But I thought we have half an hour. That was my goal, is speak half an hour. The other half an hour we have some questions. While we do the Q&A, I brought you a little handout here. If you have a device with you, download the free app. You don't need to get a username or password or anything like that. You can delete it afterwards. But the best thing, of course, to learn about games is to play them, right? So this is a little silly game, okay? This just shows you the functionality. It shows you some of the tools that are possible. As I was leaving Rhodes, this was the tool that we were starting to use and probably replacing our other gaming engine with. Just because it was mobile, it was super easy to use. There's a free version and there's a paid version, and I can talk about that. But again, not so much about the individual technology. So if you go and download Goose Chase, that's both on iOS and on Android. If you don't have your phone or you don't want to do it, share with a neighbor, right? And you will, if you go and download it and search for CeLTA Introduction Game, okay, you can play it. And I will say no more. Once you've downloaded it, this should speak for itself, hopefully. If you do have questions, talk to me. Or better, ask a neighbor. Your neighbor will probably be able to answer. The nice thing is you don't really have to explain anything anymore. A good game does all the explaining by itself. You don't need a coach for a good video game. You don't need a coach. You just start playing the game. That's how good games work nowadays, okay? So there are some tasks. We'll see who gets the most points in the next few minutes. There is one GPS task that you may do upon leaving, but don't go there now. It's going to the International Center. There is a GPS component. So once you actually physically go to the to the International Center, you get points. That's how I programmed it. And I can show you the back end of this. But some of these are collaborative. You're supposed to create a video, right? Saying saying something in Spanish. You have to take a photo. You have to answer some trivia. Okay, so there are some ways that you can play around with this. While everyone's downloading, are there questions? From here on out, it'll be much more interactive, and we'll see where it takes us. And feel free to get up, of course. Yeah.
I've had an assignment that's kind of similar, but it's much less exciting. I mean, it's just, I call it a choice assignment, and they have points.
Yeah.
It's not on a technology like
Okay,
this. So
yeah.
that's one aspect that's missing of mine. But when I've talked to some students, kind of only half like it, even though they get to choose what they do. A couple of things that I've gotten in feedback on it have been that I just wondered about is that the reflective part of it is missing, and I was wondering if you have any reflective aspect to that assignment. Mine doesn't have anything, it's just try different things and then you get different points.
Yeah.
But someone has given me the feedback that maybe it would be improved by having a reflective aspect to it.
So many of the tasks that we had were students had to write something, right? So this is, as I said, this is a much simpler game engine. You can put some, you can record yourself on video and the professor gets it. So that's a way of asking for reflections. We did ask students to reflect on many of the activities that they did and got it back that way, right? Because that kind of was part of our culture portfolio that we did before anyways, is like, what did you learn? And we did talk about those questions. So not just go watch the movie, but actually ask, how did you like it? What did you learn? Was it confusing? Did you learn, what words did you learn? So we did build that into that. To a certain degree, we didn't want them to do essays, or we didn't want them to do other things, right? And that's probably harder with a tool like this. So this tool, again, I'm saying is, is very limited in what it can do. And it might not even be good for the classroom. Think about it. So we were building a game for the new international students, for example, in one of my pedagogy courses. So it allowed the students to kind of think about what is important to these learners who are new to the US, but also there was a purpose, So think about the games like that too. If you do teacher training, this is a good way for graduate students, for future teachers, to think things through and not be, ooh, Goose Chase is a shiny new technology, I'm going to use it. Well, there are many aspects that will not work for most courses, right? So obviously there's something that we still need to think about here, okay? Study abroad, a lot of these things are used for study abroad nowadays, right? So because you can send students out. When we had our Maymester program in Germany, we gave them a list of museums to go to and photograph certain things if they were allowed to, or write back answers or reflective pieces, and then they literally went out into the city, right? So you can actually do a scavenger hunt, right, in a city or locally, and that's kind of what they do in Oregon, where in a beginning language program, the students have a kind of scenario like an alternate reality game where all of a sudden the university town is cut off from the rest of the world. There was some disaster, they don't know what's happening, and they keep getting these clues, and through the game engine they have to figure it out. So they hear like a radio transmission, right, and so they have to decipher it in Spanish, and then they need to do something and contact other people. You can do some really powerful things, and Eris is much more powerful in that you can have currencies, you can have items that you trade, you can create QR codes that you have to scan, and then you get virtual items. I mean, there's a lot you can do, and that's really what I'm trying to, hopefully you get out of this, is to kind of think and dream a little what is possible, not just now, but in 5, 10, 20 years. I mean, the tools are getting easier, they're getting more accessible, they're getting certainly nicer to be used. So this is just kind of a peek at this. And just because we only have 1 hour and actually just half an hour with me talking at first, what do we do in terms of workshops? So did anyone log in? Has anyone logged in yet? Or have you done one of the quests? I can show you on the back end how it looks, especially if somebody can create a video. Feel free to move to the side and create the video. I'll show you how it looks for the teacher and how it looks from my end, okay?
It's not one.
And there we just got the extent of my knowledge. That's I can do.
All right. So as you can see, I have a feed of all of these things that could happen here. They could happen outside of here, obviously. I can click on answers. Okay, so I can click on answers. My favorite international food is pizza. Okay, I love Chinese food. Okay. I can also go into all of these things and I could add a bonus. So if I said, oh my God, my favorite international food is pizza, is wonderful, I could give you 300 points and write super, okay? And add a bonus. I could also take stuff off just to kind of show you what this goes. So whoever did this, great job, 300 extra points. Let me look at the other submissions. Do we have a video? Here, Spanish greetings, okay? Oh, I'm sorry, I have to put you on the spot here.
Hola, Bianca, ¿cómo estás? Hola.
All right, excellent. Now the nice thing, and think about this in many ways, one of the great features for here is I can click download submissions. I can download all of these as video files. So I have an archive of all of these. So think about, think about what you can do with that. Think about, oral interviews, like fake interviews, practice sessions, all of those kinds of things. It's a very simple, easy way of people doing these, right, everywhere. Think about it in terms of your first semester as a kind of icebreaker activity. Think about it in terms of new programs, new graduate programs, new international students on campus, whatever it may be, on how to get together. You can make this kind of silly or you can make it serious, but it brings people somehow together. You can write it into the task, okay? Find 3 people who, blah, 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 okay? And like with a photo activity, take a photo with one person, right? That brings, find out 3 people whose names start with A, I don't know, whatever it may be. So use it as some of that, right? On the back end, this is very simple to do. Now again, you could think about this in some sort of game, okay? So we have K-Dog, who is with 2,700 points, is the first right now along with Luca. So you can change the length of this. So you can make this a 7-month game, or you can make it a 2-hour game, okay? So you are in control of all of those things with the game. You can make people team up, so you can preset like the silver and the blue and the red team, and you're randomly assigned or you're assigned to a specific person. And as a team, you need to do something. So you could put teams together, a native speaker and a non-native speaker, and they have certain tasks that only in a team they can do together. So there's a lot of creativity here that you can leverage with this.
So I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
Because when I took the students to France last summer, I had wanted to do something similar to this, right? And I was looking for stuff. I don't think I ever came across this.
Yeah.
And it looked like there were quite a few scavenger hunt.
Right.
apps,
Yeah.
But they were all money.
Yeah.
My question is, just do you know?
Yes, I
it
do.
sounds like an EDU thing. I mean,
Yes. So there is the EDU, and I can show you the pricing, and we use the free one for most of the time. So if you want to use the free one, you have unlimited games. You can only play 1 game at a time. So if you have 3 classes, that doesn't work. And you need to do this with teams. So you can't do individual students, which may be even better for many situations, right? This is what we use for most of the time, the free version. Now the Educator Plus, $49 a year, that allows you most things, right? Unlimited games, unlimited classes, unlimited live games, up to 10 teams, and up to 40 participants per game. That's good enough. For $49, that's relatively cheap. That's good, you can ask your chair or find some other support, and maybe, if you can't find that money, ask us at CeLTA. Maybe that's something we can help locate that money for something like this. So a small grant would be perfect for this, asking for this. Now some of these that are really big, district school-wide, sometimes they use it for admissions. I mean, think about the entering freshman class, they all play this game, and then you actually get t-shirts, At the end, whoever's the first one. Something, who knows what, right? Libraries do this, museums do this, right? And yeah, for study abroad, the main thing is to think about data. Nowadays, most students are on their phone, right? The last study abroad program I did, all the students were online and figured out a way to have their mobile device work. 5 years ago, that was not the case, so this is still relatively new, but nowadays I think that you can expect, also with Wi-Fi, that's something that's certainly possible. Like a cheap Android device in a foreign country is fairly affordable with a prepaid plan or something like that. And certainly I would think that is going to be more feasible as there's more internet connectivity in the world rather than less, probably, right? So, and think about how it makes your life easier, how it makes your life more interesting. I'm really quite interested in we always talk about individual student differences, but not enough about individual instructor personalities and identities. We're all very different in the way we teach, right? And some of this teaching too might be like, no, that's totally not how I teach. And I would say, yes, I respect that. You need to know how you teach, etc. That just needs to mesh with you. But that might be a way that allows you to do something, and then you can utilize this tool, right? So, and it is becoming more acceptable. Now, what doesn't work with gamification, and I think that's why a lot of the hype is about, is if it's just for something meaningless and you just collect points. And a lot of the software that you see nowadays does this. So if you think about Duolingo, that gives you, that has gamification built in, at some point that becomes really shallow, right? If you've used Duolingo, at some point you're just doing the same thing. You're like, why am I getting these points? There's nothing behind that. So that's not good either. So I don't even think about it in terms of as a game. I really think about it as some sort of tracking mechanism. As a way of, it's like my grade book almost. It keeps track for all of these things that students do, so I don't have to, right? And it was this kind of way, instead of sending students an email, hey, there's an event tonight, German movie night. No, I just put it in the system, it popped up, and the students were like, ooh, right? And they just clicked on it, they came, and they did come. And that was really quite amazing, as if it was worth the points and it aligned with their interest, the students did come. And it just really cut down on time, and cutting down on time nowadays, that's a fantastic thing to do. So if you teach 5 sections, I don't know, you go to, you go teach in a high school and you teach 5 classes a day, think about how, if you think this through, how much time this can save you. There are other tools again, and look out, so MacLab, okay, I think. So the MacLab is that, I can't find it right now, but MacLab was actually a gamification module for WordPress. So if you have a WordPress site, you can download this as a plugin, and it's very complex, and you can build it into your WordPress site. That was written by high school students who were really interested in writing something like this. So there are tools out there, and they will most likely change. Goose Chase might be offline in 2 weeks. That always happens with technology. You've seen it over your lifetimes. Don't put all your eggs in a basket and just rely on this solely. Print it out from time to time, download the points, something like that, have a backup plan. That goes with all technologies. All of these can fail, we know this. Or do it offline and just do it with stickers. I don't know, have the students come to you and talk to you. Now I just wanted to mention some of the things that we really didn't foresee. So some students really came and wrote essays voluntarily. They came and wrote a 3-page German essay, came to me, corrected it with me, went back, corrected it again, brought it to me, and we put it up on the website. And so if you go to the city of Pfefferhausen, and I apologize that I don't have my my swag anymore, because that was Rhodes property. So if you go to the city of Pfefferhausen, if you go to some of those sites here, if you go to the Kunstmuseum, for example, okay, so that was written by a student voluntarily based on the system. We never asked anyone to write this. The students came and said, I want to write this page for the city website. Great, you write it. They came to me, and this was a very classic traditional writing thing, but they came to my office, and we built that in. We said, go and talk to your professor. Now we had these language tables, for example, the tutoring tables in the language center that most students didn't come to because they felt like they were not doing well in the language. We said, go to the language table and speak for 15 minutes. All of a sudden, the tutors had stuff to do all of a sudden, right? So this was like looking at resources we had anyways. How can we point the students? And some of this was just making it available to the students and saying, this is an option that you have. And some of those were podcasts, right? The like Top Thema mit Vokabeln is a wonderful German podcast. Many students just followed German news and did the exercises, submitted the exercises. So this doesn't have to be some sort of like cutting edge new style of teaching or learning. This can be very traditional things that we do anyways. It's just really working with what the students need. And we talked about this. We were at a symposium in Chicago, I think 2 weeks ago, for the less commonly taught languages, and the keynote speaker talked about the general decline of languages and why that is. And one thing was that we're not really reaching our students. We're thinking about, well, gee, I love to learn a language, why don't my students? They have very different needs. They might not I like 19th century literature maybe, they might not like that. They might just want to learn about food, or they might just want to learn about manga. I don't know. Who are we to know, right? So this is some way of working with the students and really getting to know our students a little better, right? So if you can try it out, if we can maybe have a learning community about this, I don't know, some project, if you do this, feel free to reach out to me and I'll be happy to put you in touch. And if you want to do a pilot in one of your classes, do it, or do it something out of class, do it in the study abroad program. And if you want to get started, I would recommend just technically the free version of the Goose Chase is probably the easiest thing. If you say I have some programming experience, I would go with Aris probably. I think Aris would be good. If you do want to learn a little more about especially Aris, I did want to mention 2 small conferences here. One is coming up that's actually here at MSU, so if you haven't heard about it, it's right here in CeLTA. We'll actually provide the lunch. It's pretty cheap. It's $30 or 20 for students. It's right here in the Language Center. We have some people coming here, and there are 3 nodes at Minnesota, Kansas, and here. And this is all about technology. The program is out, I believe, right, Shannon? Is it listed? Here, presenters and abstracts. And so, have a look. There are 2 tracks. It'll be here and in the labs over there. It'll be good for networking and seeing people. Pardon me? October 13th. And the second thing, if you want to do more, and especially if you want to see Aris in action, because you kind of have to be in Oregon to play Aris and do it, the IELTS conference is in June. There are graduate stipends or scholarships that you can apply for. The deadline for abstract hasn't passed either, so if you're interested, it's hosted by the Yamada Language Center and the Center for Applied Second Language Studies at the University of Oregon. So that's going to be a wonderful event too. So if you're a grad student, consider applying for the money. And
it's the best conference.
It's the best conference ever.
Really is.
It's a good place. Shannon and I and several others here know a lot of people there, so if you do end up going, make sure you connect with us and we can introduce you to a lot of people there too. So a lot of this kind of stuff happening there too. We still have 9 minutes. Any questions?
So, actually, more